Baseball and one middle recently.
Yeah, we're wondering why you brought a tie at all.
Yeah.
We've never seen those in Benny's baseball.
It's an ascot.
It's just one of those things that I've always done. The topic is baseball in the 1860s in Northeast Indiana. You guys are all vintage players, so I don't need to talk about the rule, I assume. You guys know about that. So I'll just kind of jump in and get rid of that part about no gloves and catch on bounds and fair foul hits. That will take away a few minutes. But some other more fun things. I have a couple questions. Are any of you familiar with Northeast Indiana at all? Okay. So if I say Marion, you'd have no idea where Marion, Indiana is.
I could look it up if I'm not curious.
Yeah. I'll try to give some mileage difference and directions difference from a Fort Wayne perspective. So I didn't think to go from Huntington perspective, but you know where Fort Wayne is.
We've heard of it.
Okay. Another quick question. By a show of hands, does anybody know where the first Major League Baseball game was played?
It's in Fort Wayne.
Okay. And does anybody happen to know the longest canal, man-made canal in the United States is? What its name was, where it was?
Erie Canal, isn't it? Pretty good
Well,
long.
that will start off. Back in the 1840s, a canal was built from Toledo, Ohio to Evansville, Indiana, connecting the Erie, Lake Erie, and the Ohio, which meant Mississippi, which meant New Orleans, which meant New York City could get stuff to New Orleans without having to deal with the British. So the longest canal in the United States, Toledo to Evansville, goes smack dab through Fort Wayne and smack dab through Huntington. Is part of the canal still exist here in Huntington?
Snippets of it. Yeah, very small.
If you are driving back to your hometown on Interstate 69 going north, you're actually going to pass over the canal and you won't even notice it. It's only maybe 5-6 feet wide. Here's why I'm talking about the canal. And talking about where the first Major League Baseball game was played was because it was in Fort Wayne, where the first Major League Baseball game was played in 1871. But I won't be talking about that other than talking about the Youngest who played in that game. But the reason why I'm bringing up the canal is because Fort Wayne has the highest point on the canal. And that's why in 1862, the first team in Northeast Indiana ended up the Summit Cities, because it was Fort Wayne is the summit city of that canal. The 1862 Summit Cities were a typical team before 1865. There were 33 men, all were upper class, upper middle class, or wanted to be upper middle class. It was not particularly a baseball club. It was a way to make business connections. Of the 33 men, 15 were manufacturers or merchants who owned their business. 4 worked for the government, 4 were attorneys, 4 were bankers, and 3 were doctors. My favorite, though, was a gentleman named Samuel Lewis. His profession was gentleman.
Professional gentleman.
Professional gentleman.
We've heard of those guys. Yeah.
One of the things that's very difficult, I don't know if anybody here does, like, sorry. This is very informal. If you have questions, just raise your hands or yell at Bob, and I'll answer your questions as they come up. There's no need to be formal here. Researching 19th century baseball is exceedingly difficult for a couple reasons. One, there are no sources for the most part. You kind of have to just go through old microfiche and just read newspapers. And they don't get things right all the time. And then you have people who write the history of Fort Wayne 40 years later, make stuff up. So it's very, very difficult sometimes to know things. So I'm going to be, when I talk about the Summit Cities especially, I'm making some guesses. I don't really know, because there's just no way of knowing. But there was a teenager, 19 years old, who went to college in New York City in the early 1860s. I'm guessing he brought baseball, the New York game, in 1861. And in 1862, these 33 men went, let's do this. So, in the first part of May of 1862, they formed this club. The men's ages ranged from 19 to 27. As I said, they were professional people. But they didn't. There was no other team to play, so they just played their first nines and against the second nines. I assume all you guys know about first nines and second nines. And then they had the Muffins come into the play. They only played 2 games, and there's no box score of it. There's very little information about it in the newspapers, other than that first game, the player who would score the most runs got a silver ball. In the second game, a couple weeks later, they beat out a A. But there's no way of knowing who got it because they never ever talked about Summit Cities ever again. Part of the problem with researching these guys is that a non-Fort Waynian decided around 1900 to write the history of Fort Wayne. And it's horribly wrong all the time, just about everything. I'm going to read a little bit from that book, just to give you an idea of how difficult it is sometimes to do research. In the midst of the distressing news from the fields of battle, but at a time when it appeared that the struggle was soon to end, a number of Fort Wayne young men found time to form their first baseball organization known as the Summit City Club. Many of the members of the club in 1862, however, soon were enlisted in their country's cause, and some died on the southern fields of carnage. A few of the citizens are still in Fort Wayne today. And then he listed the 33 men. And I found that 32 of the men were between the ages of 19 and 27. But one was 10 years old. Thinking as a 21st century man, I'm thinking, that boy. But what it turns out was that a gentleman named Charles, we get the word name right, Charles B. Woodward lived here in Fort Wayne for 1 year in 1862. A Charles B. Woodworth was a major player in Fort Wayne in 1900, and the author just kind of assumed that Woodward was the same. Also, they talk about some of the people, some of the players dying in the battle. Out of the 33, only 9 went into battle. Because back then, if you were rich, you paid somebody off. You didn't have to go. Even if you got drafted, here's $500, and that's all let's do it. And these guys didn't go. So 9 guys went. 1 died. We got out. That's what it takes a long time to find stuff. There were some attempts after the war in 1865 to get some things going, but so many of the guys didn't come back until later in the year. It just didn't get started. But there was talk. But even in the spring of '66, they were having trouble getting things going. But finally, the last day of June, some guys got together and said, let's form a baseball club. And they formed the Kikiamas, which everybody kind of recognize that name? Because they were the first team to play a Major League Baseball game. The president of the club was a guy named Robert Millman, and he's a fun one to know a little bit about. There is a ongoing story about Fort Wayne, and some of you guys may have heard it, that the Brooklyn Dodgers came from Fort Wayne. The Kickyongas became the Dodgers, which makes absolutely zero sense because back then franchises didn't move. They were city teams. And there's a big difference between 1871, when the Kickyongas folded, and 1882. It's 11 years for a transfer. It doesn't make any sense. What happened was, and this is how research gets all muddled up, you hear about it all the time in Fort Wayne, that we became the Brooklyn Dodgers. Robert Milliman, in the late 1870s, moved to New York, and he bought a minority, I think it's 5% interest in the Dodgers. Well, therefore, if one guy from Fort Wayne had 5% of the Dodgers, that must be a franchise shift. I'm going to read a few things here that came from the papers because I think it's so much fun to hear how people wrote back then. Pursuant to a call, a number of young men met last night to organize a baseball club. A meeting was organized by the appointment of Robert Nolan, chairman, Robert Fisher, secretary, and a committee of three, Milliman, Mr. Cowdy, and Mr. Taylor, were appointed to report at the next meeting instead of bylaws. The umpire was for that game was from Toledo, and he gave all the Kickyongas a gift. Don't know what it was. I can't imagine it being much, but it made the papers that the umpire gave everybody a gift. Any umpires here? Do you give gifts? No.
Take gifts.
I said that the Live Oaks folded. Well, they sort of did. They just changed their names to the Athletics after the Philadelphia team, and made a minimum was going to be at least 16. So you could be 16 and 19.
So the Live Oaks and the Athletics, those are names that are common in vintage baseball as team names. Do you know any derivation, maybe how Live Oaks came to be a name of a team?
I have no clue. They were probably playing on the field with lots of oaks in the middle of the field, and they were alive.
Didn't want to be one of the dead oaks.
Later in October, Fort Wayne again traveled, this time to Toledo, which is about 80 miles northeast of Fort Wayne. But it didn't go as well as they had hoped because they thought they were playing the Toledo team, called the Toledo, something like this. But it turned out it was a pick 9 from all the teams in Toledo. And they did get beat. And they were a little upset with thinking that this wasn't quite kosher. Well, they probably said cricket at the time. Any other questions? Okay, one more little thing about, and that was the end of the games in 1866. They played 4 games, including the match games among themselves. After the season, they went back to being a club. This time they decided in the wintertime they wanted to be a debate club. You guys doing debating? The question for debate on the 23rd of November was Washington a greater general than Napoleon? I'm not sure it has a lot to do with baseball, but that's what they did. They did get started a little quicker in 1867. They started organizing in March. And so did a bunch of other teams. 5 or 6 teams tried to start up that year. They were not up to the Kickyonga standards. Kickyonga didn't even play them because they just weren't up to snuff. But baseball, what was very prevalent here, especially among teenagers. Teenagers loved baseball for whatever reason. There were 3 different junior teams. The Summit Cities were still around, playing only in themselves. And the Kickyongas and the Twite leagues. I'm not sure why they like the Indian leagues. Well, that someone's probably gonna ask me what Kikiyanga means, and the answer is no one knows. They back in the 18 teens, they outlawed the Miami language. So by 1860, there were no people who spoke about Miami, but they still like the names, so they call themselves Kikiyanga. The Socials were the other adult team. They also had some guys who were in their 50s. It sounds like the village teams that are here. The Kikiyangas were actually trying to be competitive. The Socials did play against the teenagers occasionally too, and had scores in the 40s and 50s. So it's like lots of games did back then. The Kikiyangas finally got a match with a town about 30 miles north of Fort Wayne called Kindleville. The name was cleverly the Kindlevilles. And there was bad blood because Kikiyangas only sent 9 guys. One of the guys got hurt. And as you know, if they don't allow substitutions, too bad. And this guy was battered and bruised somehow. And they ended up playing with just 8 guys, and they lost. So there was kind of bad blood. When the rematch came, Kikiyangas scored 80. So they got the revenge. Yeah. Again, this is such an era thing. The Athletics played an inter-club game on the common south of the depot again, and a goodly number of youth were out to witness the game. A cigar was offered to the player making the most tallies, and a shoe brush the one making the most outs. I assume defensive outs. Kind of strange, I think, giving cigars to teenagers, but you know, what the heck. There was a lively competition for both. Lowry, having the most tallies, was entitled to the cigar, but he doesn't smoke, so he gave the cigar away. Okay, I guess that's news. That's what newspapers talked about back then. John Avalon and M. Bowser made the most defensive outs, so they had to somehow share the shoe brush. It was never put into the papers who got the shoe brush. I'm going to skip 1868 because it's all pretty much the same. I mean, in 66 they played 4 games, and in 67 they played 6 games, in 68 they played 4 games. In 69 they played 12, and they played some good teams finally. They did their first really long road trip. They went down to Cincinnati in 69 for the Red Stockings, the Western Unions, and Covington. Covington game was rained out like it happens in the Midwest in the summer. And they almost beat the Red Stockings. They only lost by 78. The game against Great Western was one of the best amateurs in the country at 69. They played to a tie in 9 innings, 32-32. And as you know, the home team didn't always bat last. The Great Western batted first. In the top of the 10th, the other teams didn't score. Go to the Kikiyangas. In the 11th, the Great Western scored 4 solo home runs. Yeah. And the Kikiyangas only got 1 home run. Oh, I should mention that the Red Stockings game, the Red Stockings did 15 home runs. That's how you get a 6. George Wright hit 3. It was whatever era.